A lone rancher found a young Apache woman hanging with a sign, "The white man does not forgive." John, a lone rancher, had been awake for hours. Life on the ranch was never easy, but the quiet moments in the morning were the ones he treasured most. He saddled his horse, checked his tools, and mounted with practiced ease. The wind was cool against his face as he guided his horse along the familiar paths that crisscrossed his land. For years, he had lived alone, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and walking the same trails every day. He liked the solitude, the freedom to make his own choices, and the sense of connection with the land. As John rode, he scanned the horizon carefully. He had seen many things in his time: wild animals roaming in the distance, the occasional traveler, and even traces of Apache hunters far away. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would see that morning. Ahead, near a twisted, weather-beaten tree, something strange caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be an abandoned bundle of clothes or perhaps some lost equipment, but as he got closer, his heart began to race. There, hanging from the tree, was a young woman. She swayed slightly in the morning breeze, and a rough sign was tied around her neck with a simple but chilling message: "The white man does not forgive." John's hands went cold as he guided his horse closer, trying to make sense of the scene. Fear and shock battled with the instinct to act. He had heard stories of attacks and conflicts between settlers and the Apache, but he had always believed those stories were for towns farther away. To see this young woman in such danger, so close to his home, made the danger real in a way he had never experienced before. The rope creaked under her weight, and he could see that she was barely conscious. Her face was pale, her lips slightly parted, and there were faint marks on her arms where she had struggled against the ropes. John knew that if he did not act quickly, she might not survive. He dismounted, his boots crunching against the dry soil. He approached her carefully, speaking in a low voice, even though he was unsure if she could hear him. "It's all right. I'm here to help," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. The young woman's eyes flickered open, filled with fear and confusion. She tried to speak, but only a soft, strained sound came from her lips. John looked around, making sure no one else was nearby. The land around him was empty, just the rolling hills and the scattered cacti, but he knew the danger could come from anywhere. With practiced hands, he took out his knife and cut the ropes holding her. She slumped into his arms, weak and trembling. He could feel her small, fragile body against him, and a wave of protectiveness and concern washed over him. Carefully, he lowered her to the ground, adjusting her position so she could breathe more easily. She was shivering, and he wrapped his coat around her shoulders, hoping to give her some warmth. John's mind raced as he thought about what to do next. He could not leave her here. Someone had left her in this state for a reason, and it was clear that her life was at risk. He looked around for water, remembering that the nearest stream was about a mile away. But he knew he could not move her that far in her weakened state. He glanced at his ranch in the distance, the small wooden house where he had lived alone for years. It was a risk, bringing her there, but he knew it was the only chance she had. He gently lifted her again, balancing her across his arms as he made his way back to the trail leading to his home. Every step was careful, every movement measured, as he did not want to worsen any injuries she might have. As he walked, he tried to communicate with her, though she spoke only in short, broken words. He learned that she was Apache and that she had been marked for death. Her tribe had been attacked, and she had somehow escaped, only to be caught and left hanging as a warning. John felt a deep sadness as he listened to her story, realizing the extent of the violence she had endured. Yet there was also a sense of awe at her resilience. Despite everything, she had survived, and now her life rested in his hands. Reaching his ranch, John carefully laid her on a blanket he had prepared. He fetched water, food, and basic supplies, tending to her injuries as best as he could. He cleaned the cuts on her arms and checked for bruises, making sure she was stable. She was weak, but she slowly began to drink water and eat a little bread. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now looked at him with a mix of gratitude and caution. She did not fully trust him yet, but she sensed that he was different from the men who had harmed her. Throughout the day, John kept a careful watch. He knew the dangers were not gone, that someone could return looking for her. He made plans to secure the ranch, to hide her from prying eyes. The solitude he had once cherished now felt different. It was heavier, filled with responsibility and concern. Yet, he did not regret it. He knew that helping her was the right thing to do, even if it meant putting himself at risk. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, John reflected on the day's events. The quiet life he had known had been interrupted by a moment of urgency and courage. In saving her, he had stepped into a story far larger than himself, one of survival, trust, and the fragile boundary between danger and safety. The young Apache woman, still resting on the blanket, seemed almost like a symbol of resilience and hope amidst the harsh realities of the land. That night, John kept the lantern burning as he sat nearby, listening to her soft breathing. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that he had made a choice that could not be undone. The day had begun like any other, with the sun rising over the plains and the quiet hum of ranch life, but it ended with a life saved, a bond beginning, and a story that would change both of their lives forever. John spent the early hours of the next morning carefully tending to the young Apache woman. She had slept most of the night, exhausted from the ordeal of being left hanging and from the injuries she had suffered. Her breathing was shallow, and her body trembled slightly whenever she moved. John gently placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking softly to reassure her. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you now," he said. Though she didn't respond immediately, her eyes flickered open briefly, showing a mix of fear and cautious trust. He realized that she needed more than just physical care. She needed someone to listen, to help her make sense of what had happened. John began to gather simple supplies from his small cabin: clean cloths, warm water, and some bread and dried meat he kept for emergencies. Carefully, he helped her sit up, supporting her back as she ate slowly. Each bite was small, but it was enough to give her some strength. John noticed the cuts and bruises on her arms and legs, evidence of the struggle she had endured. He cleaned them gently, making sure not to cause more pain, and applied fresh bandages. As she regained some strength, she began to speak more clearly, though her voice was quiet and hesitant. She told John fragments of her story: how her village had been attacked, how her family had been killed, and how she had been left behind as a warning. John listened without interruption, letting her words flow even though they were painful. He could see the sadness and fear in her eyes, and his heart ached for the suffering she had endured. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there was also resilience. She had survived when many others had not, and now she was relying on him to help her find safety. John knew that bringing her to his ranch had been only the first step. The danger was not gone. People could still be searching for her, either to harm her or to send a message to others. He needed a plan. He decided to keep her inside the small cabin for now, where she would be out of sight from any passers-by. He closed the windows and doors carefully, blocking the view from outside. At the same time, he prepared a hidden area behind a pile of hay in the barn, just in case anyone came near the property. He understood that protecting her would require both caution and vigilance. During the day, he tried to make her feel more comfortable. He fetched blankets to keep her warm and offered water whenever she seemed thirsty. Slowly, she began to trust him more. She no longer flinched whenever he moved closer, and she even accepted his gentle guidance as he helped her sit and rest. John noticed small gestures of gratitude, a faint smile, a nod, or a quiet word of thanks. These small signs were enough to reassure him that she understood he meant no harm. Over the next few hours, John began asking her questions about her family and tribe. He spoke carefully, knowing that any sudden or harsh words could frighten her. She told him about her village, the traditions of her people, and the names of her parents and siblings. Her voice was tinged with sadness, but also with pride. She described the ways her tribe survived in the harsh landscape, how they hunted, gathered, and cared for one another. John was fascinated. He had always respected the Apache people, but hearing her stories firsthand gave him a deeper understanding of their culture and the struggles they faced. As evening approached, John decided to prepare a small meal for both of them. He cooked over the open fire, the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filling the cabin. The young woman watched quietly, her eyes showing curiosity as she observed the process. Though she spoke little during the meal, she ate with more confidence, and her strength slowly returned. John felt a quiet sense of relief. He knew that she would need much more than food to recover fully, but this small act of care was a step in the right direction. The night brought new challenges. The young woman was restless, haunted by memories of the attack and the time she had been left hanging. She murmured in her native language, and John tried to comfort her as best he could, though he did not understand all the words. He simply held her hand gently and offered a steady presence, letting her know she was no longer alone. Hours passed in quiet conversation, gestures, and shared silences, and by the time the moon was high in the sky, she finally drifted into a deeper sleep. John sat by the fire, thinking about the risks he had taken and the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. He realized that helping her meant more than just keeping her safe for a night or a day. He would need to protect her for as long as she was in danger, and he would need to plan for a future beyond the immediate threats. The world outside was not forgiving, and he understood that anyone could appear at his doorstep with ill intentions. Yet he did not regret his decision. He could not stand by and let an innocent life be destroyed when he had the means to help. In the following days, John continued to care for the young woman, helping her regain her strength while keeping her hidden. He built a small bed in a corner of the cabin, made comfortable with blankets and soft cloths. Each day, he encouraged her to eat and drink, to move carefully, and to rest when needed. Slowly, she began to recover. Her steps became steadier, her eyes brighter, and her voice stronger. She began to communicate more, asking questions about the land, about John, and about the strange new world she now found herself in. John also started teaching her simple skills to help her survive if she ever needed to leave the ranch. He showed her how to gather water safely, how to read signs in the landscape, and how to find edible plants. She absorbed these lessons quickly, her intelligence and adaptability shining through. At the same time, she taught him lessons of her own. She showed him the small ways her people used the land, how to track animals, how to understand the patterns of the desert, and even small rituals that brought comfort and focus. Their relationship began to shift subtly, from rescuer and rescued to teacher and learner, from strangers to companions. Despite the growing trust, the tension never fully disappeared. John remained vigilant, knowing that threats could appear at any moment. He kept his gun close and the doors of the cabin locked at night. He also considered the best way to help her in the long term. Could she return to her tribe safely? Could she find refuge elsewhere? The answers were uncertain, but he knew that as long as she was with him, she had a chance to survive. As the sun rose on another day, John felt a quiet sense of purpose. He had entered this situation by chance, discovering the young Apache woman hanging from a tree, but now he was committed to seeing her safely through the dangers she faced. Each day brought progress, each small moment of connection and recovery strengthening the bond between them. He realized that he had not just saved a life, he had begun a journey with someone who would forever change his understanding of courage, resilience, and trust. By the end of the second week, the young woman could move around the cabin more freely, her injuries healing well. She was still cautious, still wary of the outside world, but the fear that had once consumed her was slowly giving way to a sense of safety. She began to smile more often, and there were moments when she would speak freely, telling John about her dreams, her hopes, and even small jokes that made him laugh. These moments of normalcy were rare and precious, and John cherished each one. Though the challenges were far from over, a new rhythm had settled into the ranch. Days were filled with quiet work, learning, and care. Nights were spent in watchfulness, but also in conversation and shared silences that spoke of growing trust. John knew that danger could return at any moment, but he also understood that this young woman was more than a person to protect. She was someone who had survived unimaginable hardship and was now teaching him the value of compassion, courage, and human connection. Days turned into weeks, and the young Apache woman slowly regained her strength under John's care. She could move more freely around the small cabin, though she still preferred the safety of quiet corners where she felt protected. John noticed the change in her posture and expression. Fear was still present, lingering like a shadow, but there was also a growing sense of confidence. She began observing the ranch more closely, watching the movements of the cattle, the patterns of the wind, and the small signs of wildlife around them. John realized that she was not only surviving, she was learning to thrive again. The quiet of the ranch was a contrast to the chaos she had left behind. Her tribe, attacked and scattered, had left memories that haunted her dreams. At night, she would sometimes wake up with sudden shivers or calls in her native language, speaking to people who were no longer there. John would sit nearby, offering comfort without judgment. He had learned some of her language in these weeks, enough to understand her fears and to reassure her. They had developed a form of communication that combined words, gestures, and shared understanding. It was simple, yet it created a connection that both of them relied upon. Despite the relative safety of the cabin, John knew the world outside remained dangerous. Stories of raids, lawmen, and settlers searching for Apache people were common. He kept his rifle nearby and reinforced the doors and windows. Every day he would check the boundaries of the ranch, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. He also taught the young woman how to be cautious. She learned to listen to distant sounds, to hide effectively, and to move quietly if needed. These lessons were practical, but they also gave her a sense of control she had not felt in weeks. The knowledge that she could protect herself, even in a small way, brought her a quiet confidence. The tension in the air was ever present. John knew that any misstep could bring danger to both of them. Yet, within the walls of the cabin, a fragile peace had formed. The young woman began to ask questions, not only about the land and survival, but about John himself. She wanted to know why he had helped her, why he had risked his safety to save someone he barely knew. John answered slowly, carefully choosing his words. "I couldn't leave you there. No one should be left to suffer like that. Everyone deserves a chance," he said. Her eyes reflected a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and surprise. She had expected fear, anger, or indifference from a white man, but not compassion. Their conversations grew longer over time. She spoke about her family, the customs of her tribe, and the ways they celebrated life even in the harshest conditions. She told John about the songs they sang, the dances they performed, and the lessons passed down through generations. John listened, fascinated by her stories. He realized that her culture, so different from his own, was rich, resilient, and deeply connected to the land. He respected her more each day, not just for her survival, but for the strength and wisdom she carried despite the suffering she had endured. John, in turn, shared small parts of his life. He spoke about the hardships of running a ranch alone, the losses he had experienced, and the quiet joys that came with tending to the land and animals. At first, the young woman listened silently, absorbing every word. Over time, she began to ask questions, showing interest in his routines and thoughts. It was a delicate exchange, two people from vastly different worlds learning to understand each other. Their bond was strengthening, built not on words alone but on shared experiences and quiet moments of trust. As their connection grew, John noticed subtle changes in himself as well. The solitude he had once cherished now felt incomplete without her presence. He found himself thinking about her throughout the day, worried for her safety and hoping for her comfort. He admired her courage and resilience, and a deep sense of responsibility developed. Protecting her was no longer just a moral choice, it had become a personal commitment. He could not imagine returning to his old routine without ensuring she remained safe and cared for. The young woman, too, began to feel a shift in her own emotions. She had arrived at the ranch in a state of fear and despair, believing that no one could be trusted. Now she felt a growing sense of hope. John's consistent care and presence showed her that kindness existed even in a world that had been cruel to her. She began to relax in his company, smiling occasionally and participating in small tasks around the ranch. She helped feed the animals, gather water, and even learned to start a small fire safely. Each task, though simple, gave her a sense of independence and control she had not felt in a long time. Despite the growing trust, the danger remained. John knew that someone could arrive at any moment, searching for the young woman. He had to be vigilant while also teaching her how to be cautious. He showed her how to listen for distant footsteps, how to hide in the brush, and how to remain silent if someone approached. These lessons were not easy for her. Her body was still healing, and the fear lingered, but she learned quickly. Each new skill she mastered was a victory, a reminder that she was reclaiming her strength and autonomy. Their days were a careful balance between routine and vigilance. Mornings were spent tending to the animals and checking the land. Afternoons were filled with teaching and learning, stories and conversation. Evenings were quieter, often spent near the fire, sharing meals and reflecting on the day. The young woman would sometimes ask John to tell stories of his own life, while he, in turn, asked her to recount memories of her tribe. These exchanges created a rhythm, a shared understanding, and a sense of normalcy that both had been missing. One afternoon, as John repaired a fence near the edge of the ranch, the young woman watched from a safe distance. She noticed the way he worked methodically, carefully checking each post and wire. It reminded her of her own tribe's meticulous approach to their daily tasks, and she felt a small connection to the life she had lost. She approached cautiously, offering to help with small tasks. John accepted, showing her how to hammer a post securely and how to tighten the wires. Though simple, these activities strengthened their bond and gave her a sense of purpose. At night, after the chores were done, they would sit together near the fire. The young woman began to hum songs from her tribe, soft melodies that carried through the cabin. John listened, captivated by the haunting beauty of her voice. Though he did not understand all the words, he felt the emotion behind them. In return, he shared quiet stories of the land, of his life on the ranch, and of the animals he had cared for over the years. These nights became a time of connection, of healing, and of growing trust. As time passed, the young woman's confidence continued to grow. She could move around the ranch more freely, interact with the animals, and even perform small tasks independently. Yet she remained cautious, aware that danger could return at any moment. John respected this vigilance, understanding that trust had to be earned and maintained. Together, they developed a rhythm of cooperation and understanding, each supporting the other in ways that words could not fully express. By the end of the third week, it was clear that a deep bond had formed between them. The young woman had begun to reclaim her strength, her independence, and her sense of hope. John had found a new purpose, one that went beyond tending to the ranch or living in solitude. He had become a protector, a companion, and a witness to the resilience of the human spirit. Though the outside world remained uncertain, within the walls of the cabin and the boundaries of the ranch, They had created a fragile sanctuary, a place of safety, trust, and growing connection. As the weeks passed, a quiet but profound bond began to grow between John and the young Apache woman. What had started as an act of rescue slowly transformed into a companionship built on trust, understanding, and shared experience. Each day brought new lessons and discoveries for both of them, and though the world outside remained dangerous, within the boundaries of the ranch, a fragile sense of peace had taken root. The young woman, who had arrived weak and fearful, was now moving with more confidence. She could help feed the animals, gather water, and even perform small chores around the cabin without constant supervision. But beyond the practical skills, she also began teaching John about her own culture and way of life. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the hills, she showed him how to read subtle signs in the landscape, the tracks of deer, the direction of the wind, and even the patterns of plants that indicated where water might be found. John listened carefully, amazed at how much knowledge could be gathered from careful observation. He realized that her understanding of the land went far beyond what he had ever known, and he felt grateful for the lessons she shared. In return, John shared his own experiences and knowledge of the ranch. He taught her about caring for cattle, tending to fences, and recognizing weather patterns that could affect their safety and livelihood. At first, she observed quietly, learning through watching and listening. Gradually, she began participating more actively, her hands steady and sure as she performed tasks he had once feared would be too difficult for her. Each success, no matter how small, boosted her confidence and strengthened the bond between them. Evenings became a time of reflection and storytelling. John and the young woman would sit near the fire, the soft glow illuminating their faces as they shared pieces of their lives. She spoke of her family, the traditions of her tribe, and the ways her people found joy even in difficult times. John listened, fascinated by the stories, and he occasionally asked questions to better understand her world. In turn, he shared tales of the ranch, of the land and animals he cared for, and of the quiet routines that had once been the entirety of his life. These exchanges, simple as they were, created a bridge between their two very different worlds. The young woman began to open up emotionally as well. She would sometimes speak of the fear and grief that had followed her since the attack on her tribe. Though her words were quiet, John could feel the weight of her sorrow. He offered comfort, sometimes through conversation, sometimes simply through presence. He had learned that silence could be as powerful as words. Sitting beside her, listening without interruption, he helped her process the trauma she had endured. Over time, she began to laugh softly again, small moments of joy returning as trust and safety took hold. Their growing connection was not without challenges. John remained constantly aware of the danger that lurked beyond the ranch. Though the young woman was stronger and more capable than she had been, the threat of those who might come looking for her was real. John continued to keep his gun close and reinforce the cabin's doors and windows. He also taught her subtle methods of protection, how to remain quiet, how to hide if necessary, and how to read approaching footsteps from a distance. These lessons were practical and sometimes tense, but they gave both of them a sense of preparedness that eased some of the lingering fear. Despite the vigilance required, there were moments of quiet happiness. They began to share small routines and rituals that were uniquely theirs. In the mornings, she would bring fresh water from the well while he tended the animals, and in the evenings they would cook together, sharing simple meals of bread, meat, and vegetables. She taught him how to prepare some traditional dishes from her tribe, and he found the flavors and methods fascinating. Through these shared moments, they built a sense of home and familiarity, a refuge from the uncertainty outside. The young woman also began to teach John small lessons in resilience and perspective. She spoke of how her people found meaning even in hardship, how they celebrated life and nature despite loss and fear. John listened, often in awe, recognizing the depth of strength required to survive such experiences. Her perspective slowly influenced his own outlook, reminding him that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, hope and courage could flourish. One day, while walking near the edge of the ranch, the young woman pointed out tracks in the soil. John followed her gaze and realized that these were recent. Someone had been close, perhaps watching or scouting. They quickly returned to the cabin, their hearts racing. John reinforced the doors and windows and made plans to hide her in the barn's hay pile if needed. Though the presence of potential danger was alarming, it also underscored the necessity of their growing partnership. Together, they could respond more effectively than either could alone. The young woman's trust in John deepened during these tense moments. She began to rely on his judgment and guidance, yet she also contributed her own insights and observations. Her awareness of the land, honed over years of living in the wilderness, complemented John's practical experience on the ranch. This collaboration created a balance, a silent partnership that was rooted in mutual respect and understanding. As the weeks continued, their bond evolved in subtle but meaningful ways. Simple gestures, a shared smile, a careful touch on the arm, a moment of shared laughter, began to convey emotions that words alone could not express. They learned to communicate through understanding and intuition, anticipating each other's needs and feelings. The young woman, who had once viewed John with caution and fear, now looked to him as a protector, teacher, and companion. John, in turn, found a deep sense of purpose in her presence, feeling that their lives were intertwined in ways that went beyond circumstance. Through these shared experiences, the young woman also began to confront and process her past. She spoke of the loss of her family, the violence she had witnessed, and the fear that had haunted her since childhood. John listened patiently, offering empathy and understanding. He did not rush her or judge her emotions. He simply provided a safe space where she could express herself. Over time, these conversations helped her release some of the lingering fear and grief, allowing her to embrace the present and plan for the future. In return, John found his own perspective shifting. He had lived a solitary life for years, focused on survival and routine. Yet through caring for the young woman, he discovered the power of compassion, trust, and human connection. He realized that life was richer and more meaningful when shared, and that courage was not only about facing external dangers, but also about opening one's heart to others. As the days passed, the ranch became more than just a place of refuge. It became a sanctuary. The young woman's presence brought vitality, energy, and a sense of purpose to John's life. In turn, John's steady guidance and unwavering support offered her a safe haven where she could heal and rebuild her strength. Together, they had created a fragile but resilient world of trust, learning, and companionship. By the end of this period, it was clear that both John and the young woman had changed profoundly. She was stronger, wiser, and more confident, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. He had learned the value of empathy, patience, and courage, and had discovered a deep sense of purpose in caring for another human being. Though the outside world remained uncertain, within the walls of the cabin and the boundaries of the ranch, they had forged a bond that could withstand fear, danger, and the unknown. In this shared space, amid the daily routines and quiet lessons, a story of connection and resilience was unfolding, a story that neither John nor the young woman could have anticipated when their paths first crossed under the twisted tree on that fateful morning. And while the future remained uncertain, the trust and understanding they had cultivated promised that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between John and the young Apache woman had grown stronger. She had regained her health, her confidence, and her sense of hope. Though the world outside the ranch remained unpredictable and dangerous, within the walls of the cabin and across the open plains, They had built a life of trust, care, and shared purpose. Every day they learned from each other, grew closer, and prepared for the uncertainties that might come. John often thought about what the future might hold for her. While she was safe on his ranch, he knew that she could not remain hidden there forever. Her tribe might still be scattered, and others could come looking for her, whether with harmful intentions or simply to return her to her people. He struggled with the decision, knowing that any choice carried risks. But one thing was certain. She deserved freedom, safety, and the opportunity to decide her own path. He would do whatever it took to give her that chance. Meanwhile, the young woman had grown attached to the ranch and to John, yet she also felt the pull of her own people, her roots, and her past. She had survived unimaginable hardship and now had a chance to choose where she wanted her life to go. She often spoke softly about her hopes, expressing a desire to reconnect with anyone from her tribe who had survived the attack. John listened carefully, understanding her longing. He could see the strength of her spirit, resilient, courageous, and determined to reclaim the life that had been taken from her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, they sat together outside the cabin. The young woman looked at the fading light, her eyes thoughtful. "I want to find my family," she said quietly. John nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. He knew that helping her would mean stepping into even greater danger, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Together, they began making plans, discussing ways to ensure her safety while searching for any surviving members of her tribe. The next few days were filled with preparation. John packed supplies, food, water, blankets, and tools for the journey ahead. He also considered the safest route for her to travel, using his knowledge of the land and her understanding of the wilderness. They practiced moving quietly and efficiently, anticipating potential dangers such as wild animals or unfriendly strangers. Each step required careful thought, but both of them felt a growing sense of purpose. This journey would not only reunite her with her people, but also test the skills, courage, and resilience they had cultivated together. On the day of the journey, John accompanied her as far as he safely could. They moved cautiously, avoiding the main trails and using natural cover to stay hidden. Along the way, she shared stories of her childhood, her family, and the traditions she remembered. John listened attentively, often surprised by the richness and depth of her memories. These stories strengthened their bond, reminding them both of the humanity and connection that transcended cultural differences. Despite their careful planning, the journey was not without tension. At times, they encountered signs that others had passed through the area, footprints, broken branches, and distant sounds that hinted at human presence. John remained alert, guiding her through the safest paths while ensuring she remained calm and confident. The young woman, in turn, used the skills he had taught her, reading the land, understanding tracks, and moving quietly, to navigate obstacles with grace and precision. Together, they faced each challenge as a team, reinforcing the trust and partnership that had grown between them. After several days of cautious travel, they reached a hidden area where she believed some members of her tribe might be found. The moment was tense, filled with hope and uncertainty. They moved slowly, approaching a small settlement where signs of life were evident. At first there was silence, as both waited to see who might emerge. Then, faint voices called out in her language. The young woman's eyes filled with tears as she recognized familiar tones. Slowly, members of her tribe appeared, cautious but hopeful. She ran to them, embracing them with a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. John watched from a distance, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. His role in her journey had been pivotal, yet he knew this reunion was hers alone to cherish. The tribe welcomed her cautiously at first, curious about her time away and the experiences she had endured. She spoke of John, explaining how he had rescued her, cared for her, and taught her to survive. The elders listened, their expressions a mix of gratitude and respect. They had heard stories of settlers who caused harm, but her tale was different. It spoke of courage, compassion, and human connection. Though the world outside remained complicated and often hostile, they recognized the significance of what John had done. As the reunion unfolded, John remained nearby, watching quietly. He knew that his presence had been important, but now it was time to allow her to reconnect fully with her people. The young woman turned to him, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I will never forget you." John nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Words were not enough to express the depth of his feelings, but he understood the mutual respect and gratitude that passed between them. The young woman stayed with her tribe for several weeks, helping to rebuild connections and share her experiences. She taught them the lessons she had learned from John, including the skills to survive and navigate the land more effectively. Her strength and resilience inspired those around her, and her story became a symbol of hope and courage. Meanwhile, John returned to his ranch, his life forever changed by the bond he had formed and the act of compassion that had defined their shared journey. Though they were separated by distance, the connection between John and the young woman endured. Letters were exchanged when possible, and word of their story spread quietly among neighboring settlements. It became a tale of courage, kindness, and the transformative power of trust between people from different worlds. John found comfort in knowing that he had made a difference, not only in saving a life, but also in nurturing resilience, hope, and humanity. Looking back on the journey, John understood that their story was about more than survival. It was about the choices one makes when faced with danger, the courage to act despite uncertainty, and the strength that comes from compassion and understanding. The young woman had survived unimaginable hardships, yet she had also learned to trust, to hope, and to embrace life again. John had stepped beyond his solitary existence, discovering purpose, connection, and the quiet joy of helping another human being reclaim their life. As the sun set over the plains, casting golden light across the ranch and the distant hills, John reflected on everything that had happened. He had rescued her from certain harm, nurtured her back to health, and helped her reclaim her freedom. In return, she had taught him lessons about resilience, courage, and the importance of trust. Their journey together, marked by danger, learning, and deep human connection, had changed them both forever. Though the world outside continued to hold uncertainty, both John and the young woman faced it with newfound strength. They had survived challenges that tested their courage and patience, and they had done so together. In the quiet moments that followed, John knew that their story was not just about fear or danger. It was about hope, compassion, and the power of human connection to heal, protect, and transform lives. In the end, the ranch returned to its quiet rhythm, but the legacy of their journey remained. The young woman, now reunited with her people, carried the lessons of survival, trust, and kindness wherever she went. John continued his life on the ranch, forever changed by the courage and resilience of the young Apache woman he had once rescued. Their story became a quiet legend, a testament to the extraordinary impact of compassion, the strength found in human connection, and the lasting power of choosing to help someone in their moment of greatest need.